Hello and welcome to BlenderTutor.com. My name is Tom Laffeys, and today we're going to go over how to create a fireball in Blender. This is going to be kind of a introduction to the smoke simulator. We're going to go over the basics and fundamentals of what you'll need to know to be able to create this fireball, and then go on to create more advanced effects and just kind of get a good basis for creating your own effects in the simulator. So let's check out just like a quick little example of what we're going to be creating. So as you can see, I rendered that out just from, it's the same effect just from a couple different angles. I like that one. Yeah, it looks pretty cool. And it's really not that difficult to make something like this. It's just kind of time consuming. So let's get into it. Really quick, I'm going to go over just a few of the fundamentals of what you'll need to know, and then we're going to get right into Blender and start creating. So okay. So how this simulator works. Basically, there are going to be two main objects that you need no matter what, and then there's a third one that is very useful depending on what you're creating. So the first object is going to be the domain object. That's basically going to be the area where the simulation happens inside of Blender. So without a domain object, you cannot have smoke. This is where you basically control the look and behavior of your smoke or fire, depending on how big or small, how detailed the smoke looks or the fire. This is where you're going to be controlling all of that. And just keep in mind that the smoke can only be within the domain object. Okay, so the next most important object that you need to create smoke is a flow object. And this is the object that emits the smoke or fire within the domain. It could be animated. So say you have a torch that a character is carrying around, and obviously the torch would be moving around with the character, so you could have fire and smoke emitting off of that torch as long as it's inside of the domain object. And the last little bit of info on the flow object is that it can emit smoke from the mesh itself, or you can add a particle system, and smoke and fire can be emitted off of the particles coming off of the flow object. And that brings us to our last kind of point, is a particle system. Sometimes, and what that means is you don't need particles not anymore to create smoke or fire. It actually used to be required in the smoke simulator, but now you could create it with the mesh or particles. Particles would be used for pretty much anything more advanced than just simple smoke or fire coming off of an object. So if you just have if you want the ground to be on fire, you could just use the mesh of the ground to emit fire. But if you want anything more interesting, or say like an explosion or the fireball we're going to create, it's a lot easier to create a cool look and kind of control the behavior of the explosion with particles. So we're going to go over that. Okay, so is that it? No. We're going to definitely need materials and textures. No matter how great your simulation looks, if you don't have really nice materials and textures, it's still going to look like garbage. So we're going to go over creating some really nice textures and materials for our smoke and fire. The particle system settings are a huge one. You can't really just apply a particle system and then hope it's going to look good. There's a lot of little tweaks you can do to really make sure it looks really cool. Then collision objects. That's one more type of object you could have within the smoke simulator. Basically, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's if you want the smoke and fire to interact with an object, you'll need to make it a collision object. So the most common object I would think is like a floor, like a ground plane. You'd turn that into a collision object. So if you have fire or an explosion, it's interacting with the ground and it's not just looking like it's floating in midair. but you could use any object you want. So you have like a car driving, like in an action movie with a car driving out of an explosion just at the last second. You'll want the fire and smoke to kind of bend around the car instead of just pass right through it. And then last, force fields. So those are just nice to add extra, behavior to your smoke and fire. Say you have some like wind in the scene, or you could have, add a vortex to make it look more like a tornado, or even just the turbulence field to make some more interesting looking smoke. We'll go over that. We'll go over all of these things in the tutorial right now. So lastly, what are voxels? Basically, voxels are what Blender uses to simulate the smoke. The definition of a voxel: it's a volume element that represents a value on a regular grid in three-dimensional space. So say like a pixel, say like a pixel on your monitor. We'll look at the monitor as a grid, and all of the pixels create that grid. A voxel is a 3D pixel, basically, in a way, and it's basically creating a 3D grid, or in this case, it's behaving as smoke in the domain object, which is this orange cube. This smoke is made up of voxels, and basically the way the way that you could affect how it's rendered is with a texture called a voxel data texture, and we're going to be going over that pretty much right now. So let's go blow something up. All right. So we're gonna start with our new scene, and we're going to create our first thing that we need, which is a domain object. So let me really quick. Come on. Let me turn on my screencast keys. Okay, so we're going to just use our default cube as our domain object, but it's a little tiny right now. So what we'll do is let's scale it up by 10. And then just move it up along the Z by 10 as well. GZ10. Oops. Okay. I just wanted to align it with the grid floor. Okay. And you're going to want to make sure you scale it in object mode. Never scale your domain object in edit mode. It will create funky results with your simulation. So you want to make sure it's scaled within object mode. And I like to scale it by whole numbers. So I just, you can just type in whatever you want, or if you want to scale it with by hitting S, and if you hold Control, you could scale it by exact increments as well. Okay, the other thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to just name this as my domain, and that'll come in useful a little later. Okay, so we have our domain object now. Just as an example to show you how this works, let's just throw in a UV sphere really quick. And that'll be our flow object, just as an example. And over in the properties panel, you could go over to the physics panel. And with our sphere selected, we're going to add some smoke to it, the smoke effect, and we're going to make it our flow object. So these are kind of the three objects I was talking about before: the domain, flow, and collision. So this will be our flow, and right here you could actually control what it's going to be emitting. Is it smoke, smoke and fire, or just fire? So we'll do fire and smoke. And for our domain, we're going to do the same thing. We have to add a smoke physics effect and then make it the domain. And as you can see, there are plenty of options for us to go over. It's actually not too complicated. I know it seems a little daunting at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple to play with all of these. So right now, if we just hit Apple A or Alt A on Windows, you'll start playing the timeline and it'll actually start simulating smoke. Now it doesn't look very good, but that's because we haven't really tweaked any settings yet. But it's that simple to get going. Now we wouldn't be able to render this yet. For one, we're going to want to change. I mean, for me, I set my default to cycles, but right now, smoke, or more accurately, volumetric rendering is not in cycles yet. So you need to render the smoke and fire within the Blender internal render engine. So just make sure you're set to Blender render up here. If you're trying to render and nothing's happening, that is why you're going to need that set. So the other thing we're going to want to do is give the domain object a material. And we're going to call this smoke for now. And we want to change it from surface to volume. This is going to be pretty different from anything you've probably worked with if you've never worked with the smoke simulator before. This is a little different than other materials and how it works. We're going to actually want to turn this density down to 0. You'll find out in a second why we're doing that. And we can leave all this the same for now. Now let's go over to the texture tab, create a new one. We'll call one smoke. And for type of texture, we're going to want it to be a voxel data. And what we're going to do is actually in this domain object right here in the voxel data, you're going to want to make sure you select domain, and that's why I like to name it domain, because it's very easy to find. If you have just called cube, if you have more than one cube in the scene, it might just get a little complicated. And the last thing is we're going to change this influence to density, and that is it. And now we'll see in a second. Now since we have fire in the scene, also we're going to want some light. So I'm gonna put my lamp up here for now. I'm going to set it as a sun, and I'll using Control-Alt-0 just move over here to get a wider shot of my smoke. So if we were to render this right now, it's actually not going to look very good, and you'll find out why. Actually it looks okay, and the reason why is I haven't really gone into the settings yet. I don't want to get too much into this, but basically once we have fire in the scene, we're going to turn up this emission value in the material shader options. I usually have it up to like 15 or 20. And now if I render this though with just the smoke texture, it's just going to be all white and look horrible. So what we also need to do is add a fire texture. And we're going to also use voxel data for that as well. And make sure we're set to domain. But now, for source, instead of smoke, we're going to set it to flame. And then for interpolation, I change it to quadratic instead of linear. Kind of softens. It's hard to tell because there's barely anything here right now, but it kind of softens the look. And for the fire texture, we're going to want it to influence the density, the emission value, and then the emission color. All three of them. But one more thing we're going to do is we're going to add a color ramp, and that's going to allow us to, affect the look of the fire, basically what colors the fire looks like. And these could be set to any colors, but this is kind of like my default colors that I choose. So I make both ends. This end is black and 0 alpha, and this end is also going to be black with 0 alpha. I'm going to add a new one. We'll brighten up the color a lot, and we're going to make it kind of like a light whitish yellow. But then I'm also going to make it a 0.3 color. I'm going to add another one. I'll make it more of an orange. Brighten it up a little. And for alpha, we will set it to 0.5. Add one more, and I'm going to make this kind of like an orange red. And I'll make that a 0.6. And this is just like a very basic one. We're going to go a little more in depth once we do our final render, but just to get a look of what fire will look like. So let's render that now. And while it doesn't look very good, now you can at least see we do have our fire and smoke all within our scene. As you can see, it's kind of hard to see the smoke against that gray background, so let's change in the world settings. Let's make the horizon color. Let's change that to black, just so it's easier to see our smoke. And then let's go back to 0, or to the first frame. Get rid of our smoke and fire. And I want to change one more setting. We can do a couple things. Let's change the resolution of our domain from 32 to 64. And let's turn on the adaptive domain, the smoke adaptive domain. And basically what that does, you'll see in a second, is as it's creating the smoke and fire, instead of simulating it within the entire domain, it's going to only do it around where there is smoke and fire. So if you press play really quick, now you can see that there's this kind of little mini domain inside of our bigger domain, and it makes the simulation much faster. And now if we render that really quick, we have some at least slightly more interesting fire because we have more resolution in it. The divisions is the where you affect the resolution. And one more thing to get this even better looking is you could turn on the smoke high resolution, and that's basically going to be giving much more detail to the smoke. And I'm going to turn the strength up to like 3. And we can keep it at 1 for now, just so it simulates faster. And you could turn off show high resolution, and we'll simulate that really quick. And now, if I could turn this on just to look at what it looks like with the high resolution, you can see it's actually a lot more detailed. But once you start getting really detailed and high resolution with your stuff, it's really hard to move within the 3D viewport with the smoke high resolution on. So I like to keep that off. And now we can render it and just take a look at what that looks like. So already with these like very minor tweaks, we're getting more interesting looking fire and smoke. So that's kind of the basics of just creating smoke and fire right away. Let's get started on our fireball now. So we can delete that, and I'm gonna go to the front view, and I'm gonna add a little Suzanne monkey head. I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier. You can hit Control 2, or you can just go over to the modifier tab and choose a subdivision surface. And I'll make that smooth shading. I'm going to scale it down quite a bit though, because I'm going to create kind of like a large explosive fireball. So I just want it kind of sitting on the ground. We have to make sure it's in our domain, so it has to be above that green line. So we'll move it around there. I'm going to hit Control A to apply the rotation and scale. And I'm going to add a quick material to this. Just turn off specularity. And really what we want is to go to shadow. Down here we want to hit receive transparent shadows, so that the smoke lets light through it and it'll actually get light on it. Money key. Okay. So, and then the other thing I'm going to want to do really quick is we're going to just add a plane and scale that up to bigger than the domain object. And I'm going to bring that plane up here so that it's basically the monkey is sitting on the floor. I'll go to front view. I'm gonna I'm gonna move the camera to this front view, and I'm just gonna move it up like that. But I'm gonna move it back actually. And you'll see why in a second. Because I like to kind of have a longer lens for explosions and stuff, because most of the time in a movie or something, when you're seeing an explosion, it's kind of far away because you don't want the camera to be right up against the explosion. You can actually do that for like a cool effect, like that effect where I had the fireball coming up at the camera. I had a much wider angle lens on that, but for this one we're just going to do like a 70mm focal length and back the camera up quite a bit so that we'll be able to see the full explosion. So something like that. And then for the ground plane, I'll just scale it along the X so that it covers the length of my camera view. And I'll also add a material. I'll just call this ground material. And I'll do the same thing. I'll turn off specularity and I'll turn on receive transparent. And I'll just make this a little darker, so it's not the same color as the monkey. Alright, so we're going to do two more things to our monkey. We're going to add a particle system. I'll call this fireball. And for number of particles, we're going to do, I think for my final, I did between 30 and 50,000. We'll do 20,000 for this tutorial just so it goes a little quicker. And I'm going to move my domain object to the second layer really quick. So just hit M and 2. Because I want to just play around with my particles for a little bit and see how they look, just the particles alone, before I actually start simulating anything. So an explosion pretty much happens in a very short amount of time. It's like, within pretty much 1 to 2 frames. So for our fireball explosion, I'm going to say start at frame 10, and also we could say end at frame 11. And for the lifetime of these, I do 1 and turn the random up all the way, and turn on random there, and then just to get a slightly more random effect on the particles, I turn the Brownian up to 0.5. And as you can see, nothing's really happening because I have such a weak emitter value on this explosion. It's set to 1 by default, so let's set that up to like 20 and see what happens. Okay, so you can see it's starting to... Oop. There you go. It's really only getting out to like that far. We're going to want like a big explosion, so I'm going to set that up to like 50. There we go. And I know that seems pretty weak right now, but the effects of the smoke, once it starts creating it, is actually going to go beyond that of the particles. That's just kind of like a starter value for it. So it's okay if it doesn't look like it's getting out all the way to the edges of the frame. It will be quite a large explosion. Okay, so now we want our particles to interact with the floor. So let's turn that into a collision object and turn up the particle dampening and the particle friction, and then turn up the random values a little. So now you can see that the particles are not going through the floor. They're kind of stopping on the floor. And that's what we want. They're going through a little, but barely. That's okay. You can see that they are interacting with the floor now. Alright. And later on we're going to actually turn that into a smoke collision object as well. So you can just do that right now. Just turn on smoke collision. You can leave it at static. Alright, so let's move our domain object back to the first layer. And we have to change the settings now. The monkey does not have any smoke settings, so let's turn on smoke, flow, and now instead of keeping it as mesh, we're going to change it to a particle system. And then we have to actually select the system that we created, so fireball. Now there's a couple other things we're going to want to check here. We're going to turn off absolute density, and we're going to turn on initial velocity. So we want this to kind of, the velocity of the object to be dynamic and interacting with the smoke simulation. It's basically allowed, by turning these two things off, it allows us to get that kind of cool look where there's like pieces of flame in the air that aren't connected to anything else. It's just kind of like dissipating flames. We're going to want that. We will play with the set size a little later, but let's just really quickly, let's save this really quick because we don't want this to crash now. So I'll call this Fireball Tutorial, and let's just play it really quick for a few frames and see what we get. Okay, so you can see it's really tiny right now, but that's okay. Oh, and you know, the other thing we didn't do yet is we have to change this to fire and smoke. So now let's do that. And go back a few frames, just take a look at what this looks like. Should still have our materials we set before. So there you go. It's already, you know, it's pretty tiny actually, but it's looking cool so far. It's hard to see, but it's kind of a little noisy, this this fire, and the reason for that is that our material settings are not optimal yet. We're going to actually go tweak those. Let's tweak them right now actually. So for the material for our domain object, let's set everything right now. So for our density scale, that's basically how dense and thick the smoke looks. I'm going to set that up to, let's say, a 6. And for our emission, 15 should be okay. I usually do 15 to 20. That's just how bright the fire is going to look. For scattering, that's how much light can pass through the smoke. I usually set that up to like 2. That actually affects the look of the fire as well. And then the other two things we do is the resolution of the lighting, the light cache resolution basically. And that's kind of like the resolution of how it lights the smoke and fire. The higher this is, the softer the lighting will look, and it won't be so harsh and pixely. Like if I were to turn this down a lot, it would look like a very pixely fire. And if the higher you turn it up, the better it'll look. But it really does add on render time. I'd say between 50 to 100 is a good number. We'll leave it at 50 for now. The other really important smoke and fire material setting is the step size. The reason we have the noise on our fire right now is because the step size is too high. So we're going to want to turn that down to, let's say, like a 0.05. You don't really have to go any lower than that unless you're getting like really intense close-ups of your fire. But really, this should be fine. So now let's give it a render again and see what we are getting. So now we're getting, you know, some more interesting smoke. You can see the smoke a lot better. The fire's a little thick and blobby right now, but that's basically because the resolution's too small. But already you can see I have this like little piece of fire right here that's kind of floating up in the air. If we had not turned off those settings on our emit object, so if I had not turned on initial velocity and turned off absolute density, we wouldn't be getting those. So those are a nice addition that you're gonna, you know, at least for the fireball effect, that's what I'm going for. The other thing you can do is actually affect of how much flame is coming out of your object. I set that up to 3. I want a lot of flame. There we go. And the flame actually sticks around for longer. So now let's take a look at that again. There you go. So it's already looking a little better. One last thing we're going to do that I forgot to do earlier is with our monkey selected. So we have our particle system, we have our smoke. We're going to want to add one more. That's going to be the explode modifier, and we're going to actually put this up before the smoke happens. And I'm going to turn off dead. Basically, I don't want the particles to show after they're dead, but basically what this is going to do now is that particle system, it's going to explode our monkey, the actual mesh itself. So to see what that looks like, let's let it play a little. I'll go back. Basically, it's hard to see, but this is made up of broken mesh pieces from our, you can kind of see it in there, all these like little blocks and everything. That is our monkey. After the explosion, there will be no more monkey. So that's how I've been creating this fireball effect, is just exploding the monkey head altogether. The other thing we're going to do, though, is turn on rotation in our particle settings, and turn on dynamic, and then just do normal. And it'll get kind of, it won't explode all in one position, it'll all go its own direction and kind of rotate in its own way. And one more thing, we're going to change our render settings for our particles. We're going to turn off halo. It's set to halo by default. We're going to put that to none. And then for display, we'll put point so we can still see our particles. Okay, so there we go. We got our little smoke. Take a look at it. Cool. So we're already starting to get somewhere, and we really barely adjusted the domain settings at all yet, so it's just going to go get better from here. So I'm going to change this scale. The time scale basically is the speed of the simulation, and I think it's always just like a little nicer to slow it down. I believe one scale of 1 is, I think it's just like real time, but you could slow it down. So if you want like a slow motion explosion or slow motion fire effect, you can slow that down, and you could also speed it up to make this simulation go faster. So the other thing we're going to do is this vorticity setting is kind of the turbulence of the smoke and fire. I think I set that to like a 2.5. And then for resolution of our high resolution, I think the final render was up to 4. Right now we'll just go up to 2. I'm going to change this noise method to FFT. I just like the results a little better. For strength, 4.5. And then smoke cache is a really important tab right here that we're going to go over right now. This is kind of where it's saving the smoke data outside of your blend file, because if it were saving it all within the blend file, you would have a massive, like 30 gig file, because basically it saves a piece of data for each frame of the smoke, and depending on the resolution of your domain and how high you set the high resolution smoke setting to, it will, I think my final simulation that I did as an example for this tutorial was around 50 gigs or maybe even bigger. The other thing is you could set where it saves your files to and the length of your bake. So basically what the bake is it does all the processing in the background, so you don't have to sit here and watch it update frame by frame. It'll just calculate the entire explosion or simulation, and then you could play it back later. So we're going to do that, but just to do like a little test bake, I'm going to turn this down to like 30 frames. And right now, if I don't set a path, like if I had to turn on external, I could set a file path of where to save it. If you don't do that, as long as you cannot use this smoke cache setting until you've saved your blend file. And if you don't set a location to save it to, it'll just save it in the same directory that you're saving the file to. So that's fine for me. I'm going to save this really quick before exporting. And I'm going to just bake all dynamics. So It's not going too slow because it's not too bad yet. But really, once we set everything to the highest that we're going to go for, I think it's going to take at least 2 to 3 hours to bake, if not longer. Usually I just set it overnight. So as you can see now, I have my explosion that I could scroll through, and I could turn on show high resolution if I want to just take a look at what that looks like. It looks a little nicer now. So let's just render that really quick. And just keep in mind, you do not have to have show high resolution on to get that effect in the render. So let's render that out and see what our explosion looks like. Cool. So once again, it's already looking a lot better. Basically, if you want to have a big looking explosion, you want a lot more detail in it, whereas if you want it to be a tinier explosion, you could leave these settings lower. So let's clear our bake, or free all bakes right here. And I'm not really happy with the size of this explosion, so in my particle settings, I'm gonna turn up the emitter geometry to 60 because I just want it to be a bigger explosion, basically. Now the problem with that is, because of the fact that it's exploding faster, it's going to look kind of, in the simulation, it can kind of look like the particles are skipping area in between, like there will be a line of dots with nothing in between, and that's because it's moving too fast for the simulation. So you could turn on subframes. I'm going to put this up to like 10. And then in the smoke settings, you could also put that up to 10. So that'll kind of like ease the look of the particles as they're flying through the air. We've got a cat in my way, hold on. Alright. So the other thing is, for our domain, I'm gonna turn this up. I think for my final resolution I did 96, but for now I'll just do 80 just to get a slightly better, higher resolution look. And I think, yeah, for my final divisions it was either 4 or 5. I'll leave it at 2 for now. And I'll save it, and I'm going to bake this one more time, and then we'll take a look at how that's looking. Okay, so I actually ended up canceling the bake before it finished just because it was taking a while, and this was kind of just a test bake just to see how things were looking. Although, as it turns out, it's looking pretty insane. And I think the reason is, if I render this really quick, you can see there's giant fiery debris pieces coming out of this explosion, which is cool, but they're way too large and they don't look very good. I think the reason for that is that in the flow object settings, there is a there's an option called set size of your particles, basically, if you're using a particle system. I'm going to free all bakes so I can adjust things. So we're going to go to our thing. So right here you have set size, and it's at 1 right now. I believe my size that I went with for the final render was like 0.18, and so that's going to make it look a lot better. So let's actually just go over basically everything I used for my final fireball, and we're just going to bake it. I'll bake it first for you so that you don't have to sit there and make sure it works, and then I'll show you my results, and I'm going to provide the blend file with everything already set up. All you have to do is bake it on your machine. But I would recommend following along with these steps right now so that you kind of have an idea of where everything lives in the settings. And then I'll just render it out and kind of show you what it's going to look like. So for my domain object, I had this set up to 96. I had the scale set to 0.95. For my density, this is kind of like the how the density affects the smoke motion. Basically, it just means how fast will the smoke rise. The higher the value here, the faster it'll rise. So I had this set up to 0.008. For my my temp difference, it kind of also affects how fast the smoke rises. I had this set to 1. This I had set to 4 right now. And I did not have dissolve on, but basically what dissolve does is it dissolves the smoke fast. So, you know, as you were seeing, the smoke was just rising. It wasn't really going away. But say you have an effect where you have like smoke coming out of say you have like some steam rising out of a coffee cup or something. You don't want the smoke to stay there forever. You want it to kind of dissolve. That's what you'd use this for. But for a big explosion, we would want this dark, heavy smoke to stick around for a while. So I'm going to leave that off. Okay, so under smoke flames, this is where we can adjust the flame of the explosion. I turned up the smoke to a 2 because I just wanted to generate a bit more smoke. For my speed, I had this set down to 0.5. That's just the speed at which okay, so the speed of the burning of the material or whatever. So I just turned that down to a 0.5. And for this, I believe I set that up to 1. This is another vorticity. This is kind of just like the turbulence of the smoke and how it looked. Okay. For my high resolution, I set this up to 5 divisions, and strength I had at 4.5. I want to save this right now. Okay, and then let's move on to our particle system. So I had this actually all the way up to 50,000. For this one, I'll do 35,000. I actually had it start and end at 10 frames. But I then turned up the emitter all the way up to 70. And even though when you have it set to one start and end on the same frame and the lifetime is only 1, the particles actually never leave the object. It just kind of explodes. In our case, since we have the explode modifier on it, it'll just disappear after that. But since we used initial velocity, it'll follow the path that those particles would have followed. So even though the particles end right away on the monkey, their path will be followed in the simulation, and it will look awesome. All right. Yeah, that's about it. I think I turned up my subframes up all the way up to 30. So that also ups the simulation time, but it will look better for it. And then also in my smoke flow object settings, I changed this up to 30 as well. My flame rate, I think I had that at 2 for my final settings. And then that step size was a 0.18. And that's pretty much everything. And then once I bake this out, we will go over the final materials and everything. So I'm gonna set this to, let's say, 60 frames because it's gonna be such large files because we have the resolution up so high. Let me bake this up first before you do anything because we want to make sure it looks good. I don't want you to waste time baking, but feel free to experiment. And we'll see how it looks, and then we'll go over any final tweaking we need to. But I'm going to bake this real quick. I'll pause the recording, and then we'll come back and see how it looks. So see you in a bit. All right, and our bake finally finished. So let's take a look at what we've got. So we have to remember the explosion doesn't start until 10 frames in. So let's go to like 16 or 17 to get, a little deeper into the explosion and see what we've got. It'll take a little while. These files are pretty large now, these bake files, so it takes a little while to load a preview. Now this is the low resolution version, so it doesn't look like much, but if I were to turn on let's go to the domain settings. So if I were to turn on my show high resolution, you can see it's looking a little better now. Turn that off, and let's just give it a render really quick. And it's going to take a little while to render. It's got to pre-cache all the data before it could start rendering the scene. You could see we've got our explosion loading up now. It's looking pretty good. It could, I think for the preview one I showed at the beginning of the tutorial, I did about almost twice as many particles in that one, so it was a little bigger, but this one's still looking pretty good. I don't think I rendered the floor in that one, so I'm going to remove the floor in this one as well. Also, it kind of just looks like it's floating. It looks a little strange, so I'll remove the floor. I want it to interact still, but I don't want the floor to render, so we can just take this plane up here, and we could turn off the render button. So now if I were to render this again, there will be no floor there, but it's still interacting with it. The other thing is I'm gonna mess with my lighting a little bit. So we could keep this one, but the sun is just energy of 1 right now. I'm gonna turn that up to maybe 3, and then maybe give it a little bit of color just for variation, and then I'm gonna duplicate that and bring that around this way. And also I don't want it to be such a harsh angle, so I might do something like that. And this one I'm gonna bring to like a 0.75, and we'll make that one maybe a little blue. And let's try a different frame. Let's go a little further into it. Excuse me. So it'll take a second to load again. Okay, so once again, it looks kind of like nothing right now, but you'll see in a moment it'll look a lot nicer once it renders. So yeah, when you look up here, when it's preparing the scene data, it's got to basically load up that bake file. So this voxel data set is what it's loading, and it takes a little while to do that, especially with these huge files. If it's a smaller explosion, it won't take so long, but this is taking a while. And yeah, I like that lighting. It looks a little more interesting. And now you can see a little blue on this side of it, just a little more, it looks a little cooler. So you can still see there's a floor there, but now it's just over black. It's a little more easy to see the explosion. Cool. So I might move the camera back a little more for my final render. Since we don't have to worry about the floor rendering anymore, we could move a little further back from it. And I might even move my camera down about equal with the floor, and then just rotate it up like that, so then we could kind of see the explosion moving upwards. And it's actually pretty fun to kind of goof around with the camera and see what interesting angles you could get. So like I said, maybe you want to put the camera facing down and just watch the explosion coming straight towards the camera. That's a pretty cool one, but mess around with it. Let's do another. I'll move back to like 20, and render it one more time. Then I'll render out the full animation so we could get a look at it in motion. And hopefully we'll be happy with it. Cool, so let's just render that real quick. And you could even, you know, once we get into the compositor, you could mess around with definitely like some glow effects. You know, glow effects, maybe some depth of field, depending on the lens choice of the camera. Okay, so that's looking pretty cool. I'm going to render this animation out real quick. So once again, it might take about 20 or 30 minutes. So I'm going to set that up, and I'll come back and we'll check that out. Okay, and we're done rendering. So let's just check out what this looks like in motion. Just move this stuff over a little. And I basically rendered out an image sequence, so I'm just gonna add let's see, Fireball tutorial export. I'm gonna check it out in the video editor. Let's play it. Oh. So one thing you might want to do is we're going to create a new scene. Okay, so I'll call this an export scene. Basically, I don't want my scene with my data, you know, my smoke data in it, because it won't play in real time. So let's add that one more time into the video editor, and I'll make that full screen. There we go. So you get a better look at that explosion. That looks pretty cool, actually. That looks pretty good. It's not quite as big as my initial one. Like I said, I think it's because I don't have enough particles in here. And also the problem with, because of the fact that I didn't render out the floor, I could see what's underneath the floor right here. So what I should have done is masked that out, but I might re-render it just to get a better export. Basically, this is particles that were stuck under the floor that we wouldn't have seen had there been an actual floor in the shoot. So yeah, it would have been better if I covered that up. But other than that, this looks pretty good. But like I said, I probably would have, to get a slightly bigger explosion, there's a few things we could change. So I'm going to go back to my regular scene and go back to my default setup. And so a few things we could have changed to get a bigger explosion. For one, with our flow object selected, you could turn up the flame rate. You know, basically that's going to increase the amount of flame or fire or explosion in your simulation. So we could have raised that. We could have turned up the initial velocity source, so it multiplies what your velocity, your actual velocity of your, say, our particle system is. Right now it's multiplying it by 1, so it's just the same, but I could have increased that to get a bigger explosion. Also in my particle settings, right now 70 is already pretty large, but we could have brought that up a little. But I think between adding more particles, like I said, maybe between 50 and 60,000, and maybe turning up the flame rate, I think that would have done it. But I'm still pretty happy with this. I think it looks pretty cool. So just keep in mind when working with simulations, it's definitely an organic process, and you kind of have to do a little experimentation to see what works. So obviously you don't want to do, like, I think that bake for this scene took me about 6 hours. So you don't want to do that just to find out it didn't work. So I would say do it at lower resolutions first and see how it works. You're going to want to the main options to change when doing like a test bake. You're going to want your resolution of your domain near the resolution that it's going to be for the final bake, because that kind of affects the size of it. The smaller, so like the smaller this number is in the divisions in the domain, the bigger the voxels are going to be, and the more space it's going to take up. So the more divisions, that means the smaller the explosion will be, and the more detailed, but smaller. So if you change that too much, it's going to really affect the look of the final simulation. But you can, keep the high resolution divisions down. You could keep that around 1 or 2 for your test bake and see how that looks before you go for the full thing. The other thing I would say is, only bake a certain percentage of it. I think for my final one I did at the beginning, it was about 120 frames. But this one's only 60, and it still took that long. If I would say for a test bake, you could do like 10 or 20 and just get a look at how it's looking without doing the full bake. And that's about it. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something about the smoke simulator. I hope you kind of better understand the fundamentals of it, and I hope you go on to create some awesome stuff in it. I'm planning on doing a lot more visual effects and simulation based tutorials. I'm getting more into that kind of stuff, so subscribe and keep checking out for that stuff. I'll be sure to post it. So thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.